Caleb Thornton pressed his crippled hand against his dying horse's neck and did something he hadn't done since the war. He prayed. Not to God, he'd given up on that years ago. He prayed to the stranger kneeling in the mud beside him, a woman the whole town had just run out like a stray dog. "Save her," he whispered. "Please. She's all I got left." The woman looked up at him with steady brown eyes and said, "Then move out of my way and let me work." If this story touches your heart, subscribe to our channel and stay until the very end. Drop a comment with the name of your city so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Ruth Calloway had been run out of better towns than Copper Bluff, Montana. She kept telling herself that as she walked down the main street with her leather satchel clutched against her chest, feeling the eyes of 40-some people boring into her back like hot nails. Her boots kicked up dust with every step. Her jaw was set so tight her teeth ached. "Keep walking, witch," someone called from the boardwalk. Ruth didn't turn around. She'd learned that particular lesson a long time ago. Turning around only gave them a target. "We don't need your kind here," another voice added. A woman's voice this time, which stung worse somehow. "Go back where you came from." Where she came from. That was rich. Where she came from was a pine box in a West Virginia coal mine, and a family that blamed her for not being God Almighty. She kept walking. Pastor Whitfield stood outside the church with his arms folded across his chest, watching her go with the kind of righteous satisfaction that made Ruth's stomach turn. He was the one who'd done this. 3 days ago, she'd arrived in Copper Bluff, answering a notice posted in Helena. Town in need of medical help. All welcome. She'd treated 6 patients in those 3 days. A child's fever, a rancher's infected tooth, an old woman's arthritic hip. All better. All grateful. Then she'd made her mistake. She'd told Mrs. Alderman the truth about her pregnancy, that the baby was breech and she'd need careful monitoring, that the herbs Ruth could prepare would ease the delivery when the time came. Mrs. Alderman had been relieved. Pastor Whitfield had not. Witchcraft, he'd called it from his pulpit that Sunday morning. A woman with no credentials, no husband, no family, practicing dark arts on the bodies of God-fearing people. Dark arts. Ruth almost laughed. Her grandmother had taught her everything she knew, and that old woman had delivered more babies and set more bones than any fancy doctor in Chicago. But a woman alone with a satchel full of herbs and no ring on her finger? Well, that was an easy target in a town where one man controlled the conversation. So here she was, walking. The edge of town came faster than expected. The last building, a feed store with peeling paint, passed on her left. The road stretched ahead into open territory, and for the first time since she'd set her jaw and started walking, Ruth felt the fear creep in. She had no horse, no wagon, $14 in her pocket, and 3 days of food in her satchel. Helena was 60 miles east, and the summer heat was brutal, even in Montana. "Ma'am?" Ruth stopped. A boy, maybe 12, had followed her to the edge of town. He was skinny, sunburned, clutching his hat in both hands. "Tommy Pruitt," she said, recognizing him. She'd brought his fever down 2 days ago with willow bark tea and a cold compress. "You shouldn't be talking to me. Your mama will tan your hide." "I don't care," Tommy said, and the defiance in his young voice almost broke her composure. "What they did ain't right. You helped me when I was burning up. Mama knows it too, even if she won't say so." "Go home, Tommy." "There's a ranch," Tommy said quickly, like he'd been rehearsing. "About 4 miles north, past the creek where the cottonwoods grow thick. Man named Thornton. He keeps to himself, don't come to town much. His horse got hurt bad yesterday, caught her leg in a gopher hole coming down the ridge. Nobody'll help him, on account of he fought for the Confederates, and folks round here ain't forgiven that." Ruth studied the boy. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you help things that are hurting," Tommy said simply. "And that horse is hurting something terrible. Plus, Thornton's place is on the way to the Helena Road, more or less. You'd have somewhere to rest before the long walk." Ruth felt something crack inside her chest. That small, painful fracture that happened every time someone showed her unexpected kindness. She knelt down to Tommy's level. "Thank you," she said quietly. Tommy jammed his hat back on his head, suddenly embarrassed. "Just follow the creek north. You can't miss it. There's a gate with a cattle skull nailed to the post." He paused. "Mr. Thornton might point a gun at you. He does that. But he won't shoot. Probably." "Probably," Ruth repeated. "He ain't mean," Tommy clarified. "Just hurt. Like his horse." Then the boy turned and ran back toward town before anyone could see him talking to the witch. Ruth found the gate with the cattle skull just as the sun reached its highest point, beating down on her shoulders like a punishment. 4 miles of walking in summer heat with a heavy satchel had left her lightheaded and dry-mouthed, but she'd survived worse. The ranch was modest. A small house, a barn, a corral with fencing that needed repair in several places. Everything looked maintained but tired, like a man holding himself together through stubbornness alone. The horse was in the corral. Ruth saw her immediately and drew a sharp breath. A buckskin mare, beautiful even in distress, standing on 3 legs with the 4th held up at an angle that told Ruth everything she needed to know. The swelling was severe. The leg wasn't broken. If it were, the horse would be down. But the soft tissue damage was bad, and from the way the mare's coat was lathered with dried sweat, the pain had been going on for hours. "That's far enough." The voice came from the porch. Ruth stopped and raised both hands slowly, her satchel dangling from her right. Caleb Thornton stood with a rifle cradled in the crook of his arm, not quite aimed at her, but not quite aimed away either. He was tall, lean in the way men got when they worked harder than they ate. Dark hair, sun-weathered face, maybe 30. His left hand gripped the rifle stock at an odd angle. The fingers curled stiffly, not quite closing all the way. "I'm not armed," Ruth said, "and I'm not looking for trouble." "Then you're lost," Caleb said flatly. "Road to Helena is 2 miles east." "I know where the road is. I'm here about your horse." Something shifted in his expression. A flicker behind the careful blankness. "Who sent you?" "A boy in town. Tommy Pruitt." "Pruitt's kid." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for help." "Your horse did." Ruth nodded toward the corral, where the mare had turned her head, watching them with large, pain-glazed eyes. "That swelling's been building for at least 12 hours. If the fluid isn't drained and the damage isn't stabilized, she could lose that leg. And if she loses the leg..." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. His gaze moved from Ruth to the mare and back. "You a doctor?" he asked. "I'm a healer. Herbs, bone setting, wound treatment. I learned from my grandmother, who learned from hers. I don't have a degree, and I don't pretend to. But I've treated horses, cattle, and people for 10 years, and I haven't lost one yet that could be saved." "Big claim." "It's the truth." Another silence. The mare shifted her weight and let out a low, pained sound that cut through the still air like a knife. "Copper Bluff ran you out," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. Ruth met his gaze. "They did." "Why?" "Because I'm a woman with no husband, and I use herbs instead of prayers." That was enough for Pastor Whitfield. Something that might have been the ghost of recognition crossed Caleb's face. He knew what it was like to be cast out. Ruth could see it in the way his shoulders tightened. "If you hurt her," he said slowly, lowering the rifle. "I'll make Whitfield look like a saint." "Fair enough." Ruth was already moving toward the corral. "I'll need clean water, as much as you can boil, and clean cloth if you have it." "I have it." "Then let's not waste any more time. She's suffering." Caleb set the rifle against the porch rail and followed her. Ruth noticed the way he walked, steady, purposeful, but favoring his left side slightly, and that stiff hand held close to his body, like something he was trying to hide and protect at the same time. At the corral fence, Ruth paused. "What's her name?" "Josie." "How old?" 7. Had her since she was a foal. He said it simply, but Ruth heard the weight behind the words. 7 years was a long partnership out here. "She's pregnant," Ruth said, studying the mare's belly. Caleb went still. "What?" "About 4 months along, maybe 5. You didn't know?" "No." His voice was rough. No. She wasn't supposed to. I keep her separated from the stallions at the Hadley Ranch when she's—" He stopped, ran his good hand over his face. "Damn." "That changes things," Ruth said carefully. "The injury, the swelling, the stress, all of it affects the foal. If I treat her wrong, we could lose both of them. If I don't treat her at all, we definitely lose both." "Both." Caleb repeated the word like it physically hurt him. "I can help her," Ruth said, and she made sure her voice carried absolute certainty, because this man needed certainty the way his horse needed relief. "But I need you to trust me. Not forever, not blindly, just for the next few hours. Can you do that?" Caleb looked at Josie. The mare looked back at him with those pain-filled eyes, and Ruth watched something break and rebuild itself in real time on his face. "Tell me what to do," he said. They worked side by side for 3 hours straight. Ruth talked constantly as she worked, not to fill silence, but to keep Caleb informed and to keep Josie calm. Her hands moved with a sureness that Caleb watched with increasing attention. The way she palpated the swollen leg, identifying the exact location of the damage. The way she prepared a poultice from herbs in her satchel, explaining each one. "Comfrey for the bone and tissue, arnica for the swelling, yarrow to prevent infection." She packed the poultice around the injured leg with gentle, practiced motions. "Hold her head. Talk to her. She trusts your voice more than mine." Caleb positioned himself at Josie's head, murmuring to her in a low, steady tone that Ruth couldn't quite hear, but the horse clearly responded to. Her trembling eased slightly. "You're good with her," Ruth observed, not looking up from her work. "She's easy to be good with. She don't expect anything except honesty." Ruth heard the implication clearly. People did expect more. People disappointed. "I need to drain the fluid," she said. "It's going to hurt her, and she'll try to kick. Can you hold her steady with—" She stopped herself, but not fast enough. "With one good hand?" Caleb finished, his voice flat. "Yeah, I can hold her." "That's not what I meant." "It's what you were thinking." He positioned himself more firmly at Josie's head, his right hand gripping the halter, his left arm pressed against the horse's neck. "Go ahead, I've got her." Ruth worked quickly. The incision was small, precise. Josie jerked and Caleb held, murmuring words Ruth couldn't hear, his whole body braced against the mare's strength. The fluid drained, yellowish and warm, and Ruth cleaned the site and applied a fresh poultice with swift efficiency. "Good girl," Caleb murmured to Josie. "Good girl, it's done." "Not quite," Ruth said. "I need to wrap the leg to keep the poultice in place, and she needs to stay off it as much as possible for the next week. The foal is stable for now, but I want to monitor her closely." "A week," Caleb's expression shifted. You planning on staying a week? I'm planning on keeping your horse alive. If that takes a week, it takes a week. Unless you'd rather I leave, and you can wrap the leg yourself. She held out the cloth. He didn't take it. I ain't got much to offer, he said after a moment. There's a room in the house that's mostly storage, but there's a bed. Food's plain. I don't talk much. I don't need much talking. I need clean water, a place to sleep, and access to your horse twice a day. Fine. Fine. They stood there in the corral, with Josie between them, the summer sun blazing overhead, and Ruth felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not safety. She'd stopped believing in that after West Virginia. Not hope. That was too strong a word. Purpose. She felt purpose. That first evening set a pattern that neither of them planned. Ruth checked Josie at sunset, changing the poultice, monitoring the swelling, talking softly to the mare. Caleb lingered nearby, not helping unless asked, but clearly unwilling to leave. You can ask, Ruth said without turning around. Ask what? Whatever's chewing at you. You've been staring at the back of my head for 20 minutes. A pause. Copper Bluff. What really happened? Ruth finished tying the fresh wrap and straightened up. I told you what happened. You told me the short version. Whitfield's a fool, but he can't run someone out of town alone. Takes more than one man's opinion. Ruth wiped her hands on the cloth. He was right, and she was tired of carrying it alone. I arrived 3 days ago, she said. Answered a notice posted in Helena. Town needs medical help. All welcome. I treated 6 people. A child's fever, Tommy Pruitt. An infected tooth. An old woman who could barely move her hands. All better within a day or two. So they should have been grateful. They were, until I examined Eloise Alderman. Ruth leaned against the fence. She's 8 months pregnant. The baby's breech. I told her what I could do to help. Herbs to ease the delivery. Techniques to turn the baby. She was relieved. She was scared, Caleb. First baby, no doctor within 60 miles, and she was terrified something would go wrong. Whitfield's her brother-in-law, Caleb said quietly. I didn't know that until Sunday morning, when he stood up in that church and called me a witch. Ruth's voice stayed level, but her hands had tightened into fists at her sides. By noon, the whole town had turned. People I've helped 2 days before wouldn't look me in the eye. Mrs. Alderman's husband came to the boarding house and told me to leave before sundown. And Eloise? She was standing behind him, crying, but she didn't say a word. The silence between them was different now. Heavier. Caleb leaned against the fence post beside her, close enough that she could hear him breathing. I was at Shiloh, he said abruptly. The battle. I was 17. My father signed me up because he believed in the cause, whatever that meant to a tobacco farmer in Tennessee. I came home 3 years later with a hand that don't work right and a head full of things no boy should see. Ruth waited. My father was dead by then. Fever. My brother had taken over the farm. And my girl, Sarah, the woman I was going to marry. She was standing on the porch next to him, wearing a ring that should have been mine. He flexed his bad hand slowly, the fingers barely moving. She looked at this hand, and she looked at my brother's 2 good ones, and I reckon the math was simple. There's nothing simple about that, Ruth said. That's betrayal. That's survival. She needed someone whole. I wasn't. You are whole. The words came out sharper than Ruth intended. A stiff hand doesn't make you half a man, and anyone who thinks otherwise isn't worth grieving over. Caleb turned his head to look at her. In the fading light, his expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes shifted, a door opening a crack. You say that easy enough. I say it because I've been told the same lie about myself. that I wasn't enough, that if I'd been a real doctor, a real healer, I could have saved my husband when that mine collapsed on him. His mother said it to my face at the funeral. If you were what you claimed to be, my son would still be alive. That's a cruel thing to say. Cruel things are easy when you're looking for someone to blame. Ruth pushed off the fence. I should check Josie one more time before dark. Ruth. She stopped. For what it's worth, Caleb said, I don't think you're a witch. And I don't think you're not enough. She didn't turn around, because if she did, he'd see that those simple words had done what Whitfield's cruelty couldn't. They'd cracked her open. Thank you, Caleb. Don't thank me. I'm just stating facts. Ruth smiled in the gathering dusk where he couldn't see it, and went to tend the horse that was slowly, impossibly, becoming her reason to stay. 3 days in, and they built something neither of them had a name for. It wasn't friendship exactly. It was more like two people standing on opposite sides of a river, recognizing the same look in each other's eyes, and neither one brave enough yet to build a bridge. Caleb brought her coffee every morning without being asked. Ruth noticed he took it black and made his the same way. He repaired a loose board on the corral fence after she mentioned Josie leaning on it. She prepared a salve for his left hand after watching him struggle to grip a fence post for the 3rd time that day. You don't have to do that, he said when she set the small jar on the kitchen table. It's comfrey and beeswax. Same thing I use on Josie's leg. It'll ease the stiffness. Won't fix it, but it'll help. I didn't ask for help. Neither did Josie. I helped her anyway. He stared at the jar for a long time after she left the room. That evening, Ruth saw him on the porch, rubbing the salve into his left hand with slow, careful motions. He didn't mention it. She didn't ask. Progress. On the 4th morning, Ruth was checking Josie's leg when she heard hoofbeats approaching from the south. 2 riders, moving fast. Caleb appeared from the barn with his rifle before Ruth could call out. He moved to the front of the house, positioning himself between the approaching riders and the corral. Get inside, he said. No. He shot her a look. Ruth. I said no. Last time a man told me to hide, I ended up walking 60 miles. I'm done hiding. The riders pulled up at the gate. 2 men in suits too clean for ranch country. The first was tall, silver-haired, sitting his horse with the easy confidence of a man who owned everything he could see. The second was younger, harder, wearing a badge pinned to his vest. Thornton, the silver-haired man called pleasantly. Beautiful morning, isn't it? Redmond. Caleb's voice could have frozen water. You're on my land. Temporarily, I assure you. Judge Silas Redmond smiled the way a cat smiles at a cornered mouse. I've come with a proposition. A generous one, I might add. This territory is changing, Caleb. The railroad is coming through Copper Bluff, and progress waits for no man. Especially not one farming 40 acres of rocks with a crippled hand. Ruth felt Caleb go rigid beside her. The cruelty was casual, almost friendly, which made it worse. My hand works fine, Caleb said, and my trigger finger's on the right one. Redmond's smile didn't waver. Let's not be dramatic. I'm offering you fair market value for this land. $800. That's more than this place is worth, and we both know it. It's worth what it's worth to me, and it ain't for sale. Redmond's gaze shifted to Ruth, and something predatory entered his expression. I see you have company. The woman from town. The one Pastor Whitfield was so concerned about. My business isn't your concern, Caleb said. Everything in this valley is my concern, son. I'm the law here, he nodded toward the man with the badge. Deputy Marshal Greer can explain the legal particulars if you'd like. There are liens, Caleb. Your father's debts. Never fully settled. Inconvenient, I know. But the law is the law. My father's debts were paid, Caleb said, but Ruth heard the uncertainty beneath the certainty. Were they? Redmond reached into his coat and produced a folded document. I recently came across paperwork suggesting otherwise. Now, I'm not an unreasonable man. Sell me the ranch and the debts disappear. Everyone's happy. Everyone except me. Redmond sighed, the patient sound of a man who always got what he wanted and found resistance merely tedious. Think about it. I'll give you 1 week. His gaze flicked to Ruth one more time. And Miss Calloway, yes, I know your name. You might want to consider moving on. Copper Bluff has no use for unlicensed healers, and I'd hate to see you brought up on charges for practicing medicine without credentials. He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy and turned his horse. The deputy followed without having spoken a single word. Ruth and Caleb stood in silence until the riders disappeared over the ridge. He's lying about the debts, Ruth said quietly. You know that. I know it, but knowing it and proving it are different things out here. Caleb's grip on the rifle had turned his knuckles white. Redmond owns the judge, the deputy, half the businesses in town. He's been circling this land for years. My ranch sits right where the railroad needs to cut through to reach the copper deposits north of here. What are you going to do? Caleb looked at her, and for the first time, Ruth saw something beyond the careful walls. Raw, aching defiance. Same thing I always do, he said. Stand my ground. Alone? The word hung between them. That's how I've done it before, he said. Ruth stepped forward. How's that been working out for you? He almost smiled. Almost. Not great. Then maybe, Ruth said, it's time to try it differently. She walked back to the corral to check on Josie, leaving Caleb standing on his porch with a rifle in his hands and a question in his chest that he wasn't ready to answer yet. But he would be. She'd make sure of it. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with his father's land deed spread out in front of him, reading the same lines over and over until the words blurred. The deed was clear. The land was his, paid in full, signed by a territorial clerk in 1874. But Redmond hadn't gotten where he was by playing fair. You're still up. Ruth stood in the doorway, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her hair loose. She looked younger without the tight braids she wore during the day, and Caleb looked away fast because noticing that felt dangerous. Go back to sleep, he said. Can't. Your pacing woke me an hour ago. And then you stopped pacing, which was worse. A man who paces is thinking. A man who stops is deciding something. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without invitation. Show me. It's not your problem. Redmond made it my problem when he called me by name and threatened me with charges. Ruth held out her hand. Show me the deed, Caleb. He pushed it across the table. She read it carefully, her finger tracing the legal language. This is clean, she said. Clear title, no encumbrances, no liens recorded. You read legal documents often? My husband was a miner. You learn fast when mining companies try to cheat your family out of death benefits. Her voice was steady, but her jaw tightened. Redmond's bluffing. He's counting on you not having the deed, or not knowing what it says. And if he's not bluffing? If he's forged something? Then we need a copy of the territorial records. The originals are in Helena. That's a 5-day ride. It's a 2-day ride if you push it. Ruth looked at him across the table. But you can't leave right now. Josie needs daily treatment, and Redmond would love nothing more than to find this place empty. So I'm trapped. You're not trapped. You're choosing to stay because it matters. She folded the deed carefully and pushed it back. There's another option. Someone in town might help. Someone who doesn't answer to Redmond. There's nobody in Copper Bluff who'd stick their neck out for me. Tommy Pruitt's mother might. The boy didn't follow me to the edge of town on his own. Someone told him where your ranch was. Someone who knew your horse was hurt and knew I could help. Caleb stared at her. He hadn't considered that. Agnes Pruitt, he said slowly. Her husband worked this land with my father before the war. She's the only person in town who still nods at me when I come in for supplies. Then she's the one we talked to. We? I'm not sitting here waiting for Redmond to make his next move. I did that in West Virginia. I sat and waited and let other people decide my future. I won't do it again. The certainty in her voice made something twist in Caleb's chest. Not pain exactly, more like a muscle being used for the first time in years. All right, he said, but we go together and we go armed. I don't carry a gun. Then you stay behind me. Ruth raised an eyebrow. We'll discuss that on the way. They rode into Copper Bluff the next morning, just past sunrise. Caleb on his gelding, Ruth on a borrowed mare from the neighbor's spread. Old Hank Dawson had owed Caleb a favor and didn't ask questions. The town was barely awake. A few shopkeepers sweeping boardwalks, the blacksmith already at his forge. Caleb felt the stares immediately, the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when they passed. Friendly place, Ruth murmured. Keep your head up and your mouth shut until we get to the Pruitt store. I'll keep my head up. The mouth shut part we'll see about. Agnes Pruitt was behind the counter of the general store, sorting bolts of fabric. She was a sturdy woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and rough hands. When she saw Caleb walk in with Ruth behind him, her face cycled through surprise, concern, and something that looked like relief. Caleb Thornton, she said. Been a while. Agnes, he removed his hat. You know Mrs. Calloway. I know what happened to Mrs. Calloway, and I know it was wrong. Agnes said it loud enough for anyone near the open door to hear, and Caleb respected her for it. Tommy told me what you did for his fever. I'm grateful. I need your help, Ruth said directly. Both of us do. Agnes glanced toward the door, then motioned them toward the back room. Not here. Whitfield's got eyes everywhere, and Redmond's deputy has been watching who comes and goes since yesterday. In the cramped storeroom behind the shop, surrounded by barrels of flour and crates of canned goods, Agnes listened as Caleb explained about Redmond's visit and the supposed debts. Your father didn't owe anyone a cent when he died, Agnes said firmly. Henry Thornton was the most honest man I ever knew. He paid cash for that land, and my husband witnessed the signing. Can you prove it? My husband kept records of every transaction he witnessed. It's in his ledger, locked in the safe at the bank. But the bank is run by Cecil Morton, and Cecil answers to Redmond. Of course he does, Caleb said. There's another way. Agnes lowered her voice. Martha Kincaid, the old school teacher. She was the territorial clerk's wife before he passed. She kept copies of everything, deeds, transfers, mining claims. She's got boxes of records in her attic. Martha Kincaid won't talk to me, Caleb said. She crosses the street when she sees me coming. She'll talk to me, Ruth said. Agnes and Caleb both looked at her. She's the woman with the arthritic hip, Ruth explained. I treated her 3 days ago. She could barely walk before. She could move again when I left. Whitfield's her nephew, Agnes warned. I know, but she was crying with relief when the pain eased. That kind of gratitude doesn't disappear because a man waves a Bible. Agnes studied Ruth with open admiration. You've got nerve, Mrs. Calloway. I've got nothing left to lose. That's different. Caleb watched this exchange and felt something shift inside him that he couldn't name. Two women making plans, taking control, refusing to be small. It was foreign to everything he'd known. I'll come with you, he said. No, Ruth shook her head. Martha won't open her door if she sees you. A Confederate veteran showing up with questions about land records will scare her half to death. I go alone. The hell you do. Caleb, Ruth turned to face him fully. I survived 3 days in a hostile town. I walked 4 miles in summer heat. I drained your horse's infected leg with a pocket knife. I think I can knock on an old woman's door. Agnes covered a smile with her hand. Fine, Caleb said, and the word tasted like surrender. But I'll be on the street. If anything goes wrong, you holler. If anything goes wrong, you'll hear it. I'm not quiet when I'm angry. I've noticed. Ruth left through the back door of the store, and Caleb positioned himself across the street, leaning against a post outside the feed store with his hat pulled low. He could see Martha Kincaid's small house at the end of the block, and he watched Ruth walk toward it with that straight-backed stride that made her look taller than she was. She knocked. Waited. Knocked again. The door opened a crack. Caleb couldn't hear the conversation, but he watched the body language. Martha's posture was stiff at first, defensive. Ruth spoke, hands at her sides, unthreatening. Martha glanced up and down the street. Ruth said something else. The door opened wider. Ruth stepped inside. Caleb exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and settled in to wait. 10 minutes. 15. His fingers drummed against his thigh. The right hand, the good one. The left stayed pressed against his side, useless. 20 minutes. The door of the feed store behind him opened, and a voice he didn't want to hear said, "Caleb Thornton, didn't expect to see you in town." Deputy Marshal Greer stepped onto the boardwalk. He was younger than Caleb by a few years, clean-shaven, with the flat eyes of a man who followed orders without questioning them. "Free country," Caleb said. "Last I checked." "For now." Greer leaned against the opposite post, mirroring Caleb's posture. "Judge Redmond wanted me to remind you about his offer. 1 week. Generous terms, considering." "Considering what?" "Considering the alternative?" Greer's hand rested on his holster, casual as a handshake. "The judge is a patient man, Thornton, but patience has limits." "So does mine." "That woman you're running with," Greer continued, "the one from town, you know she's got no legal standing here, no license, no credentials. If the judge wanted to press charges for unlicensed medical practice, he could have her locked up by sundown." Caleb straightened off the post. His right hand hung loose at his side, close to his own holster. "You threatening her?" "Stating facts." "Here's a fact for you, Greer. That woman saved my horse. She treated half this town before Whitfield poisoned them against her. And if Redmond thinks he can use her to get to me, he's dumber than he looks." Something flickered in Greer's eyes. Not quite doubt, but close. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No, Redmond's making it harder. I'm just standing still." Greer tipped his hat with mocking politeness and walked away. Caleb watched him go, his heart hammering. And when he turned back toward Martha Kincaid's house, Ruth was already coming down the steps. She was carrying a folder. Caleb met her halfway down the block. "What happened? What did she say?" "She's terrified of Whitfield, and she's terrified of Redmond. But she's more terrified of dying alone in pain. And I'm the only person who's helped her in years." Ruth held up the folder. "Copies of every land transfer in this valley from 1870 to 1880. Ruth paused. "She also told me something else. Redmond has been buying up forged debt documents from a clerk in Helena. Your ranch isn't the only one he's targeting. There are 4 other families in this valley with the same problem." Caleb took the folder and opened it right there on the street. His father's signature, clear and strong. The clerk's seal. And no debts. Nothing owed. Clean title. "This is proof," he said. "It's proof for a fair court. The question is whether there's a fair court anywhere Redmond doesn't control." "The territorial governor's office in Helena." 5 days' ride, Ruth reminded him. Or one day if someone takes these documents on the stagecoach. Caleb looked toward the stage office. The coach to Helena runs every Tuesday. That's tomorrow. I know. He met her eyes. But I can't go. Josie needs you, and Redmond's watching me. If I leave, I'll go. No. Caleb, I said no. You're not riding 5 days alone with documents that could destroy the most powerful man in this valley. Then who? Ruth demanded. They stood on the street in Copper Bluff, the morning sun beating down, holding proof that could save Caleb's ranch and 4 other families, and neither of them could carry it where it needed to go. I'll do it, a voice said behind them. Agnes Pruitt stood in the doorway of her store, arms folded. My sister lives in Helena, Agnes continued. I've been meaning to visit. Nobody'll think twice about a shopkeeper's wife taking the stagecoach to see family. Agnes, if Redmond finds out, Caleb began. Redmond killed my husband's livelihood when he drove out the small ranchers who were our best customers. My store's barely surviving. My boy is growing up in a town run by a crook and a bully. Agnes's voice shook, but her eyes were steady. Don't tell me about risk, Caleb Thornton. I've been living with risk for years. At least now I'd be risking something for a reason. Ruth took Agnes's hands. Are you sure? I'm sure. Give me the documents. I'll be on tomorrow's coach, and I'll put them in the governor's hands myself if I have to sit in his office for a week. Caleb handed over the folder. His throat was tight. Agnes, thank you. Thank me when it works. She tucked the folder under her arm. Now get out of town before Greer comes back with friends. And take care of that horse. Tommy will never forgive you if anything happens to her. They rode back to the ranch in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Charged. Electric. Like the air before a summer storm. When they reached the gate with the cattle skull, Caleb dismounted and stood for a moment with his hand on the post. In 3 years, he said, nobody's lifted a finger to help me. Not once. I asked for nothing and got nothing. And I told myself that was fine, because at least nobody could let me down. Ruth dismounted beside him. She didn't speak. Then you showed up, covered in dust, kicked out of town, with nothing but a satchel of herbs and more stubbornness than any 10 people I've ever met. He turned to face her. And in 5 days, you've done more for me than anyone since my father died. I didn't do it alone. Agnes moved because you moved. Martha opened her door because of you. Even Tommy Pruitt, that boy walked to the edge of town because something about you made him brave. Caleb's voice was rough. You do that to people, Ruth. You make them braver than they are. Ruth's eyes glistened, but she blinked it back. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me since my husband died. It's the most I've said to anyone since the war. So we're even. The almost smile they shared was fragile, new, and real. Then Josie whinnied from the corral, sharp and urgent, and the moment shattered. Ruth was moving before Caleb could react, climbing the fence with her skirts gathered in one hand. Josie was circling the corral, agitated, her injured leg trembling but bearing weight in a way it shouldn't have been. What's wrong? Caleb was right behind her. Ruth reached Josie and placed both hands on the mare's belly. Her face changed. She's cramping. The foal is shifting position. Is she losing it? Not yet, but the stress, the injury, the infection, and now the commotion today, it's taking a toll. I need to calm her down, and I need to check the foal's position. Ruth's voice was steady, professional, but Caleb could see the tension in her shoulders. Hold her head, like before. Caleb gripped Josie's halter with his right hand, pressed his forehead against the mare's neck. Easy, girl. Easy. Ruth worked for 20 minutes, her hands moving over Josie's belly with practiced pressure, pausing, listening with her ear pressed against the mare's side. When she finally straightened, her expression was grave. The foal's turned. It was positioned correctly before, head down, ready for a normal birth in a few months. Now it shifted sideways. What does that mean? It means if it stays like this, Josie can't deliver naturally. I might be able to turn it back, but not now. She's too agitated, and any force could injure the foal. So what do? We wait. We keep her calm. We keep her fed. We keep her stress as low as possible. And we pray that the foal turns back on its own. Ruth wiped sweat from her forehead. Caleb, I have to be honest with you. I've seen this before. Sometimes the foal corrects itself. Sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't, when the time comes to deliver, I'll have to turn it manually. That's dangerous for both of them. How dangerous? Ruth held his gaze. I could lose one, maybe both. The words hit Caleb like a fist. He turned away, gripping the fence rail so hard the wood creaked. This is because of Redmond, he said. The stress. His men showing up, the threats, all of it. You don't know that. I know that horse was fine until that man rode onto my land and started making threats. Josie could feel it. Animals feel everything we try to hide. Ruth put her hand on his arm. He flinched, but didn't pull away. Caleb, listen to me. Josie is strong. The foal is strong. We have time. Agnes is going to Helena with those documents, and when the governor sees what Redmond's been doing, it's over. We just have to hold on. I'm tired of holding on. I know. So am I. Her hand tightened on his arm. But I'm not going anywhere. Not until Josie delivers that foal, and not until Redmond is finished. You hear me? He looked at her hand on his arm. Small, strong, steady. Yeah, he said quietly. I hear you. That night, Caleb did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He cooked a real meal. Not beans from a can, not jerky and hardtack. He killed one of his chickens, roasted it with wild onions he'd picked from the creek bed, and made biscuits from the flour Agnes had slipped into his saddlebag without him noticing. Ruth sat at the table and watched him work with undisguised surprise. You can cook, she said. My mother was Cherokee. She taught me before the soldiers took her to the reservation when I was 8. He said it plain, like stating the weather. My father raised me after that, but the cooking, that was hers. Caleb, Ruth's voice was careful. You've never mentioned your mother before. Don't mention her much to anyone. He set the plate in front of her. Eat. You've been working all day, and you forgot lunch again. I didn't forget. I was busy. You forget. Every day. You take care of everything and everyone except yourself. He sat across from her. That's going to stop. Are you telling me to eat? I'm asking you to let someone take care of you for once. Ruth looked at the plate, then at him, then back at the plate. This smells wonderful, she said softly. Don't sound so surprised. They ate in a silence that had somehow become the most comfortable part of their days. When they finished, Ruth washed the dishes despite Caleb's protests, and he dried them with his good hand, setting each one on the shelf with deliberate care. Their fingers brushed when she handed him the last plate. Neither of them moved. Caleb, Ruth whispered, don't. He pulled back, set the plate on the shelf, stood with his back to her, his shoulders tight as wire. Don't do that. Do what? Look at me like I'm someone worth looking at. You are. I'm a broke rancher with a crippled hand and a dead man's land that a judge is trying to steal. I got nothing to offer anybody. You cooked me dinner, Ruth said. You stood in the street and told a deputy marshal to go to hell because he threatened me. You let me stay when you had every reason to send me away. You've got plenty to offer, Caleb Thornton. You just can't see it. He turned around. His face was raw, open, stripped of every wall he'd built. Last woman I let in took one look at this hand and chose my brother. I can't. Ruth, I don't know how to do this anymore. Neither do I. She stepped closer. My husband's been dead 4 years, and I still reach for him in my sleep. I've been run out of 3 towns. I carry everything I own in a leather bag. I'm not exactly a prize. Don't say that. Then don't say it about yourself either. They stood in that kitchen, close enough to touch, neither one touching. The space between them filled with everything they were too scared and too honest to pretend wasn't there. I'm going to check on Josie, Ruth said finally. I'll come with you. You don't have to. I know. They walked to the corral together. Josie was resting, her breathing steady, the injured leg tucked carefully beneath her. Ruth checked the poultice, felt the mare's belly, nodded. She's stable, for now. They stood side by side at the fence, and Caleb did something that cost him more courage than facing down Greer or Redmond or any man with a gun. He reached out with his left hand, the broken one, the stiff one, the one Sarah had looked at with disgust, and laid it on the fence rail next to Ruth's hand. Ruth looked at it. Then, slowly and deliberately, she placed her hand over his. His fingers couldn't close around hers. They barely moved. But she held them anyway, and the warmth of her palm against his scarred knuckles said everything that words couldn't. They stood like that until Josie sighed in her sleep, a deep and peaceful sound, and somewhere in the darkness a coyote sang, and neither of them let go. The week Redmond had given them ran out on a Tuesday morning, and he didn't wait until noon. Ruth was in the corral with Josie when she heard them coming. Not 2 riders this time. 6. She counted the hoofbeats before she saw the dust, and her hands went still on Josie's belly. "Caleb," she called, keeping her voice even so the mare wouldn't spook. He was already at the porch with his rifle. He'd heard them too. "Get inside the house," he said. "We talked about this. Ruth, there are 6 of them." "I can count." She climbed the fence and walked to him. "Give me the shotgun." He stared at her. "Agnes showed me where you keep it. Top of the wardrobe, left side, loaded with buckshot. I told you I know how to shoot. Now give it to me, or I'll get it myself." Caleb went inside and came back with a shotgun. He handed it to her, and she broke it open, checked both barrels, snapped it shut. The motion was practiced and clean. "My brothers," she said, before he could ask. "Coal country. You learn young, or you don't learn at all." The riders came through the gate without stopping. Redmond was in front, wearing a black coat despite the summer heat, sitting his horse like a man arriving at a property he already owned. Deputy Greer rode at his right. Behind them came 4 men Ruth didn't recognize, hard-faced, hired, the kind of men who did ugly work for steady pay. "Thornton," Redmond called, reining up 20 yards from the porch. His eyes found Ruth and the shotgun, and his smile thinned, but didn't disappear. "I see you've armed your guest. How hospitable." "Your week's not up until tonight," Caleb said. "I'm an early riser, and I'm afraid circumstances have changed." Redmond reached into his coat and produced a folded document with a red wax seal. "This is a court order, signed by Judge Whitmore in Helena, authorizing the seizure of this property to satisfy outstanding debts owed by the estate of Henry Thornton. That court order is based on forged documents, and you know it." "What I know and what the law says are often different things, Caleb. That's why we have courts." Redmond held the paper toward Greer. "Deputy, serve the order." Greer dismounted. He walked toward the porch slowly, his hand near his holster, his eyes moving between Caleb's rifle and Ruth's shotgun. "Don't come any closer," Caleb said. Greer stopped. He looked back at Redmond, then at Caleb. "Thornton, I'm just doing my job." "Your job is to uphold the law," not enforce a rich man's forgeries. I don't know anything about forgeries. I know I've got a signed court order from a territorial judge, and I'm required to serve it. Greer held out the paper. Take it. Read it. If it's wrong, you can challenge it in court. With what money? What lawyer? Redmond owns every attorney between here and Helena. That's not my problem. Ruth stepped forward. It will be your problem when the governor's office sees the real records. Every head turned to her. Redmond's smile vanished. What real records? He asked, and for the first time his voice lost its pleasant coating. The originals. Every land transfer in this valley from 1870 to 1880, including Henry Thornton's deed, paid in full, no debts, no liens, signed, sealed, and witnessed. Ruth held his gaze. They're on their way to Helena right now, along with documentation of every forged debt document you've used to steal land from families in this valley. Silence. Absolute silence. Then Redmond laughed. It was a cold sound, nothing like amusement. A woman with no credentials, no standing, and no legal authority thinks she can threaten me with paperwork? He leaned forward in his saddle. Who's carrying these supposed documents? Who would be foolish enough? Ruth said nothing. Caleb said nothing. It doesn't matter, Redmond said, recovering his composure. The court order is valid today. Whatever you've sent to Helena, even if it arrives, even if anyone reads it, that will take weeks. By then, this property will be legally transferred, and there's no court in the territory that will reverse a completed seizure. He nodded to Greer. Serve it. Greer took another step forward. Caleb cocked the rifle. I'm not going to shoot a lawman, Caleb said quietly. But I will shoot any hired gun that sets foot on my porch. And Redmond, if you think those 4 men behind you are worth dying over a piece of paper, you go right ahead. One of the hired men shifted in his saddle. Another exchanged a glance with the man beside him. They were calculating odds, and the odds included a man with a rifle who clearly knew how to use it, and a woman with a shotgun who looked like she wanted to. This is foolishness, Redmond said. You're delaying the inevitable. Maybe, but I'm delaying it today. Caleb's voice was iron. Now get off my land before I stop being polite. Redmond studied him for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted to Ruth, and something ugly moved behind his eyes. Very well. Today. He gathered his reins. But I want you to remember something, Thornton. I offered you $800 and a clean walk away. The next offer won't be so generous. His eyes locked onto Ruth. And Mrs. Calloway, you should know that harboring a fugitive for medical charges is a criminal offense. I've sent a telegram to Chicago this morning. It seems there's quite a file on you there. Ruth's blood went cold, but her face stayed still. I'm not a fugitive. That's not what Chicago says. Apparently you left West Virginia under some rather interesting circumstances as well. Something about a mining company investigation and a husband who died under questionable conditions. The words hit Ruth like a physical blow. Beside her, she felt Caleb go rigid. That is a lie, Ruth said, and her voice shook for the first time. Is it? I suppose we'll find out. Redmond tipped his hat. Good day to you both. He turned his horse and rode away. The hired men followed. Greer was last, and he paused just long enough to drop the court order in the dust at Caleb's feet. I'm sorry, Greer said. He sounded like he meant it. Then he was gone. Ruth stood on the porch with the shotgun growing heavy in her hands, and Redmond's words echoing in her skull. Questionable conditions. Under investigation. Fugitive. Lies. All lies. But lies didn't need to be true to destroy you. She'd learned that in Copper Bluff. Ruth. She couldn't look at him. If she looked at him and saw doubt in his eyes, she would break. "Ruth, look at me." She turned. Caleb's face held no doubt. It held fury, but not at her. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping. "Is any of it true?" he asked. "Any of what he said about your husband?" "No." The word came out cracked. "Daniel died in a mine collapse. 30 men died that day. The mining company tried to blame the workers for ignoring safety protocols instead of admitting they'd cut costs. When I demanded an investigation, they turned it around on me. Said I had access to the medical supplies, and maybe the collapse wasn't an accident." "They accused you of killing your own husband?" "They accused me of negligence, of knowing the mine was unsafe and not reporting it." It was nonsense. I was a healer, not a mine inspector, but it was enough to run me out of town. Daniel's mother believed them. His brothers believed them. Everyone found it easier to blame the woman with the herb bag than the company that owned their livelihoods. Ruth's hands were shaking. She set the shotgun against the porch rail before she dropped it. "I loved him," she said. "I loved him, and I couldn't save him, and I have carried that every single day since. If Redmond thinks he can use my dead husband to hurt me, he's wrong. Nothing he does can hurt worse than what's already been done." Caleb set his rifle down. He walked to her, and he did something that surprised them both. He took her hands, both of them, his right hand strong and sure, his left hand stiff and clumsy and trying. "I believe you," he said. "I believed you the minute you knelt in the mud and put your hands on my horse. I believed you when you walked into a hostile town to help me, and I believe you now." "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you can't fake the way you touched Josie. I know you can't fake what you did for Tommy Pruitt or Martha Kincaid. And I know that a woman who killed her husband wouldn't carry his memory the way you carry Daniel's." Ruth's composure finally broke. Not dramatically, not with sobs. Just tears, silent and steady, running down her face while she gripped Caleb's hands like they were the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting under her feet. "We're in trouble," she whispered. "Yeah," Caleb agreed. "We are." "Agnes won't reach Helena for 2 more days. Even if the governor acts immediately, it could be a week or more before anything changes here." "I know." "Redmond will come back before then, with more men, maybe with real charges against me." "I know that too." "So what do we do?" Caleb released her hands and picked up the court order from the dust. He read it slowly, carefully. "This is legal," he said. "Crooked, but legal. If Greer comes back with more deputies, I can't shoot lawmen. I'd hang for it." "Then we need the town," Ruth said, wiping her face. "We need Copper Bluff to stand with us." "They won't. They're afraid of Redmond. They were afraid of Whitfield, too, until Martha Kincaid opened her door. People change when someone gives them a reason." "What reason?" Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she straightened her shoulders, and something hardened in her face. "Eloise Alderman," she said. "She's 8 months pregnant with a breech baby. The nearest doctor is 60 miles away and too old to make the ride. Whitfield can call me a witch all he wants, but when that baby comes, I'm the only person within 100 miles who can turn it." "You want to go back to the town that threw you out?" "I want to help a woman who's terrified and alone, and whose brother-in-law cares more about his pride than her life." Ruth picked up the shotgun and handed it back to Caleb. "I don't need this for where I'm going." "Ruth, if Whitfield can't deliver a breech baby, I can. And when Eloise Alderman is holding her healthy child, that town is going to have to decide who they believe. A preacher who calls everything he doesn't understand witchcraft, or a woman who saved a life right in front of their eyes." Caleb looked at her. This woman who had walked into his life covered in dust and defiance, who had healed his horse and held his broken hand, and stood beside him with a shotgun against 6 men. He looked at her, and he understood, with a clarity that terrified him, that he would do anything for her. "I'm coming with you," he said. "Caleb, I'm coming with you, not because you need protection, because you shouldn't have to walk back into that town alone. Nobody should." Ruth's eyes searched his face. Whatever she found there made her nod. "Together, then." Together. They rode into Copper Bluff for the second time that week, and the reception was no warmer. Whitfield saw them from the church steps, and his face went purple. Shopkeepers retreated behind their doors. A cluster of women near the well stopped talking and stared. Ruth dismounted in front of the Alderman house and knocked. Bob Alderman opened the door. He was a big man, thick-necked, with hands built for farm work. His expression, when he saw Ruth, was pure hostility. "I told you to leave." "I know what you told me. I'm here about your wife." "My wife don't need—" "Bob!" A voice from inside, thin, strained. "Bob, let her in." Alderman's jaw worked. "Eloise, let her in." Ruth didn't wait for his permission. She stepped past him into the house, following the sound of that desperate voice. Eloise Alderman was in bed, propped up on pillows, her face ashen and sheened with sweat. Her belly was enormous, and her hands gripped the bedsheets like she was trying to anchor herself to the earth. "How long?" Ruth asked, already opening her satchel. "Since last night. The pains come and go, but they're getting worse." Eloise's eyes were wild with fear. "Something's wrong. I can feel it. The baby's not moving right." Ruth placed her hands on Eloise's belly and felt the position. The baby was still breech. Worse, the cord was pressed against the cervix. She could feel the pulsing through the abdominal wall. "Eloise, I need you to listen to me carefully. Your baby is positioned feet first, and the cord is in a dangerous spot. I can turn the baby, but I need to do it now, before labor progresses further." "Can you save him?" "I will do everything in my power." "That's witchcraft!" Whitfield had followed them inside, his face flushed with righteous anger. "Bob, get this woman out of your house." "I will pray for Eloise, and the Lord will—" "The Lord gave me hands that know what they're doing," Ruth snapped. "Are yours going to turn a breech baby?" "How dare you!" "Pastor Whitfield." Caleb's voice came from the doorway, quiet and hard. "Step outside." "This is none of your concern, Thornton. A woman's life is everyone's concern. Step outside, or I'll move you myself." Whitfield looked at Caleb, looked at the iron in his stance, and for once in his pious life chose the wiser course. He retreated to the porch, sputtering. "Bob," Ruth said firmly, "I need hot water, clean cloths, and I need you to hold your wife's hand. Can you do that?" The big man looked at his wife. Eloise reached for him, tears streaming. "Please, Bobby, let her help. Please." Something crumbled in Bob Alderman's face. He nodded once and went for the water. What followed was the hardest hour of Ruth's life. Turning a breech baby was brutal work. Brutal for the mother, terrifying for the father, and agonizing for the healer who carried the weight of 2 lives in her hands. Eloise screamed. Bob held her hand and went white as chalk. Ruth talked constantly, her voice steady even as sweat ran into her eyes. "I can feel the head. I'm turning him now. Eloise, breathe for me. Don't push, not yet. Breathe." "I can't." "You can. You are. Keep breathing." The baby turned. Ruth felt it shift under her hands, the head rotating downward, the feet moving up, and she nearly wept with relief. "He's in position. Eloise, on the next pain, you push." The scream that filled that small house could be heard on the street. Ruth knew because later people told her they'd stopped where they stood. The butcher set down his cleaver. The blacksmith lifted his hammer and didn't bring it down. Mrs. Hollister at the general store gripped the counter and prayed. Then another sound replaced the scream. A baby's cry, strong, furious, alive. Ruth lifted the child, a boy, pink and howling and perfect, and placed him on Eloise's chest. The mother's sobs turned to laughter, turned to something beyond words. Bob Alderman looked at his son, then at Ruth, and his face collapsed. "Thank you," he choked. "God, thank you." Ruth's hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. She tied off the cord, cleaned the baby, checked Eloise for bleeding. Everything was steady. Mother and son were alive and well. She stepped out onto the porch because she needed air, and because if she stayed in that room one more second, she was going to fall apart. Caleb was there, and behind him, half the town. They'd gathered in the street during the delivery. Ruth hadn't heard them over Eloise's cries and her own pounding heart. But they were there now, 20, 30 people, standing in the afternoon heat, waiting. Pastor Whitfield pushed to the front.
"Well, what happened? Is Eloise—"
"Mother and baby are both healthy," Ruth said. Her voice was hoarse. "It's a boy." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Relief, joy, wonder. "She turned the baby," Bob Alderman said from the doorway behind her. His voice was thick and raw. "The baby was backward and tangled, and she turned him with her bare hands. She saved my wife, and she saved my son." He looked at Whitfield. "You call that witchcraft, Pastor? Because I call it a miracle." Whitfield opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I call it a miracle too," said Martha Kincaid, stepping forward from the crowd, leaning on her cane. "Same as what she did for my hip. Same as what she did for Tommy Pruitt's fever." "She fixed my tooth," called a man from the back. "Hadn't been able to eat proper in months." "My mother's hands work again because of her poultice," another voice added. One by one they spoke. The people Ruth had treated in her 3 days before Whitfield had poisoned them against her. They'd been silent then. They weren't silent now. Whitfield's face went from red to white. He turned to the crowd, arms raised. "Brothers and sisters, we cannot be swayed by—" "Sit down, Horace." Mrs. Hollister, the storekeeper's wife, fixed him with a glare that could have bent iron. "You nearly killed that girl and her baby with your foolishness. Sit down and be quiet for once in your life." The pastor sat on the porch steps. He looked, for the first time, like a small man. Ruth felt Caleb's hand on her back. Not pushing, not pulling, just there. "There's something else," Caleb said to the crowd, and his voice carried, the way it had when he'd faced down Redmond. Quiet, but unbreakable. "Judge Redmond is trying to seize my ranch with forged debt documents. And he's not just coming after me. He's done it to the McAllisters, the Dunns, the Haywoods, every small rancher in this valley who stands between him and the railroad money." Murmurs. Angry murmurs. "We sent proof to the governor in Helena," Caleb continued. "The real records showing clean titles and no debts. But Redmond's moving faster than the law. He tried to serve a seizure order this morning. He'll come back, and when he does, he'll bring enough men to take what he wants." "What are you asking?" called a rancher near the back. Caleb looked at Ruth. She looked at him. "I'm asking you to stand," Caleb said. "Not just for me, for yourselves, for every family Redmond's cheated, for the town you want Copper Bluff to be instead of the one he's turned it into." Silence. Long and heavy. Then Bob Alderman stepped off the porch. He was still shaking from the birth of his son, still had tears on his face, and he didn't care who saw. "I'll stand," he said. "This woman saved my family. That's enough for me." "I'll stand," said Martha Kincaid. "We'll stand," said the rancher from the back, and the man beside him nodded. One by one, like stones dropped into still water, the voices came. Not everyone, not Whitfield, not a few others who slipped away toward their homes, but enough. Enough to fill a street. Enough to change the math that Redmond had been counting on. Ruth stood on that porch with a baby's blood still on her hands, and the weight of a town's trust settling onto her shoulders. And she felt something she'd stopped believing in back in West Virginia. She felt like she belonged. Caleb reached for her hand. The left one. The stiff, broken, impossible one. And this time his fingers closed, just barely, just enough, around hers. He held on like a man who'd finally found something worth gripping. And he didn't let go. They didn't have to wait long. Redmond came back the next morning, and he didn't come with 6 men. He came with 12. Ruth heard them before dawn. She was in the corral checking Josie's leg when the sound of hoofbeats rolled across the flat ground like distant thunder. She counted, kept counting, stopped when the number made her stomach drop. "Caleb!" He was already on the porch, rifle in hand, his face carved from stone. "I hear them." "That's not 6. "No, it ain't." He looked at her. "You remember what I told you about the root cellar? The one behind the barn?" "I'm not hiding in a root cellar." "Ruth, how many times do we have to have this conversation?" Despite everything, something that was almost a smile crossed his face. "Had to try." "You tried. You failed. Give me the shotgun." He gave her the shotgun. They stood on the porch together as the riders appeared. Redmond in front, Greer beside him, and behind them, a small army of hired men carrying rifles across their saddles. It was enough force to take the ranch 3 times over, and everyone present knew it. But Redmond pulled up short at the gate. His face changed, because Caleb and Ruth weren't alone. Bob Alderman stood at the east fence with a hunting rifle and a face that said he hadn't slept and didn't care. Beside him, the rancher named Hatch and his 2 grown sons, all armed. At the west fence, old Henry Dawson and 3 men Ruth didn't recognize. Neighbors, she guessed, from the spreads beyond the ridge. Martha Kincaid sat in a wagon near the barn with Mrs. Hollister and 2 other women, none of them armed, but all of them watching with the kind of fierce attention that made armed men nervous. Tommy Pruitt was perched on the corral fence with a slingshot, which Ruth would have found comical if her hands hadn't been shaking. In all, perhaps 20 people from Copper Bluff had come in the night, quietly, without fanfare, and positioned themselves around Caleb Thornton's ranch like a human wall. Redmond surveyed the scene. His smile didn't appear this time. "This is unexpected," he said. "This is what happens," Caleb replied, "when you push people far enough." Redmond's eyes moved from face to face, calculating. He was a man who understood numbers, and the numbers had changed. Not because Caleb's people outgunned his, they didn't, but because these were citizens, townspeople, women and children. Shooting at hired guns on a remote ranch was one thing. Shooting at a crowd of voters while a territorial governor's investigation was already underway was something else entirely. "This changes nothing legally," Redmond said, but his voice had lost its silk. "I have a court order." "You have a piece of paper signed by a judge you bought," Bob Alderman called out. "And we've got 20 witnesses who'll testify to that in any court that ain't yours." "Mr. Alderman," Redmond turned to him, "I'm surprised to see you here. Wasn't it just last week your pastor warned this woman was dangerous?" "Last week my pastor nearly let my wife and son die. This woman saved them both." Alderman spat in the dust. "So you'll forgive me if I've revised my opinions." A rumble of agreement from the others. Redmond's jaw tightened. "Deputy," he said to Greer, "serve the order." Greer didn't move. "Deputy. Judge Redmond." Greer's voice was careful, measured. "I'm looking at 20 civilians, including women and children. If I serve that order and your men move on this property, people will get hurt, maybe killed. I signed on to enforce the law, not start a massacre. You signed on to follow orders. I signed an oath to the territory of Montana, not to you. The silence that followed was absolute. Ruth watched Redmond's face and saw something she hadn't seen before. Genuine surprise. He hadn't expected defection. Men like Redmond never did. They assumed loyalty could be purchased permanently, and they were always shocked when they discovered it had an expiration date. You're making a mistake, Greer. Maybe, but it's mine to make.
Greer turned his horse to face the hired men. Any of you boys want to ride into those people? Go ahead. I won't be part of it. The hired men exchanged glances. Two of them, the youngest, immediately turned their horses and rode away without a word. A third followed. Then a fourth. Cowards, Redmond hissed. Smart, Caleb corrected. They can count. 8 hired men remained, plus Redmond, against 20 townsfolk, most of them armed. The math had shifted, but it was still dangerous. 8 desperate men with nothing to lose could do a lot of damage. Ruth felt Josie shift behind her in the corral. The mare was agitated, sensing the tension, and Ruth's mind split between the standoff and the horse carrying a foal that couldn't afford more stress. Redmond, she said, and every head turned. I know about the McAllisters, the Dunns, the Haywoods. I know you've used forged debt documents against every small rancher in this valley. The proof is on its way to the governor right now.
So you've claimed, but claims aren't evidence. Agnes Pruitt is on the Helena stagecoach with original territorial records showing clean titles for every property you've tried to seize. Martha Kincaid provided them from her late husband's collection. He was the territorial clerk, in case you've forgotten. Every signature, every seal, every transaction, all clean, all legal. Redmond's composure cracked, just for a second. A flicker of genuine alarm that he smoothed over almost instantly. Agnes Pruitt, he repeated. You overlooked her. People like you always overlook the shopkeeper's wife. That was clever, using someone beneath notice. Redmond's voice had gone quiet, and quiet Redmond was more dangerous than loud Redmond. But it doesn't matter what she carries to Helena. Documents can be disputed. Investigations take months. By then what? You'll have burned us out? Shot us? With 30 witnesses watching? Caleb stepped off the porch. Ruth's heart seized, but he walked steadily toward Redmond's horse, stopping within arm's reach. It's over, Redmond. Not today, maybe. Not this week. But it's over, and you know it. Nothing is over until I say it is. That's what men like you always believe, right up until the moment it isn't true anymore. Redmond stared down at Caleb. His hands were tight on the reins, his face rigid. You're a crippled Confederate farmer with 40 acres of dirt, he said, and the cruelty was naked now, stripped of all pretense. You think these people will stand with you when things get hard? They'll scatter. They always do. And when they're gone, you'll be alone again. You and your witch. Maybe, Caleb said. But right now, today, I'm not alone, and neither is she. And that's enough for today. Something moved behind Redmond's eyes. Not defeat. Men like him didn't accept defeat easily. But recognition. The recognition that this particular battle, on this particular day, was lost. This isn't finished, he said. No, Caleb agreed. But you are. Redmond turned his horse. The remaining hired men followed. They rode through the gate and up the ridge, and nobody breathed until the last rider disappeared from view. Then Bob Alderman let out a whoop that startled every horse on the property, and suddenly people were talking, laughing, clapping each other on the back. Mrs. Hollister was crying. Old Dawson was shaking hands with men he'd barely spoken to in years. Ruth sat down on the porch steps because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Caleb found her there. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. You're shaking, he said. I know. You were magnificent. I know that too. She tried to smile and mostly succeeded. So were you, walking up to his horse like that. What if he'd had a gun drawn? He didn't. But what if he had? Then I reckon you'd have shot him with that shotgun. I would have. I know.
They sat there while the celebration swirled around them. Two people who had come to this territory broken and alone, and were learning, slowly, painfully, what it meant to be neither. Ruth, Caleb's voice dropped low enough that only she could hear. What you said about Agnes and the documents, the governor, is it going to be enough? I don't know, she admitted. Redmond's right about one thing. Investigations take time, and he's powerful. He has allies in Helena we don't know about. So this could all come to nothing. It could. She turned to face him. Are you sorry I stayed? Don't ask me that. I'm asking. No. The word came out rough and raw. I ain't sorry. Not for 1 second of it. Whatever happens with Redmond, whatever happens with this land, you being here is the best thing that's happened to me since before the war. Caleb Thornton, was that a declaration? It was a fact. I deal in facts. So do I. And here's one. Ruth put her hand on his knee. I'm not leaving. Not when Redmond comes back. Not when the investigation takes months. Not when winter hits and this ranch gets cold and hard. I'm staying. You don't owe me. I'm not staying because I owe you. I'm staying because this is the first place since West Virginia that feels like mine. Because Josie needs me, and those people in town need me, and... She stopped, swallowed. And because you need me, even though you'd rather eat your own hap than admit it. I'd admit it. What? I need you. He said it like pulling a nail from his own flesh. I need you, Ruth. I've needed you since the minute you knelt in that corral and put your hands on my horse. And I don't know what that makes me, and I don't care. Ruth's eyes filled. She blinked hard, and the tears fell anyway. It makes you brave, she said. That's what it makes you. Caleb reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. His right hand, steady and sure. Then he lifted his left hand, the stiff one, the ruined one, and touched her other cheek. Ruth turned her face into his damaged palm and pressed her lips against the scarred knuckles. Caleb made a sound like something breaking open inside him. Not pain, release. The sound of a man setting down a weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it wasn't part of his body. Get a room, Bob Alderman called from across the yard, and the crowd dissolved into laughter. Ruth and Caleb pulled apart, both red-faced, both trying not to smile and failing completely. I should check on Josie, Ruth said. I should thank these people. Neither of them moved. Ruth. Caleb took her hand, the left one holding the right. When this is over, when Redmond's done and the land is secure and Josie's delivered her foal, I want to ask you something. Something important. You could ask me now. No, I want to earn it first. I want you to see me with the fight won, not just fighting. I want you to choose me when you don't need me, not just when we're in the trenches together. Ruth squeezed his hand. You underestimate yourself. And you overestimate me. Between the two of us, we might land somewhere close to the truth. She laughed. A real laugh, full and warm, and Caleb memorized the sound of it, because he'd been living in silence for 3 years, and he never wanted silence again. The rest of that day belonged to the town. People stayed at the ranch through the afternoon, helping repair the fence damage from the standoff, bringing food they'd packed in wagons. Mrs. Hollister organized a meal that fed 30 people from supplies that shouldn't have stretched that far, but somehow did. Martha Kincaid pulled Ruth aside near the corral. I need to tell you something, the old woman said. Her face was troubled.
About Redmond. What about him? He's not just after the land. The railroad deal. It's bigger than anyone knows.
I found more documents in my attic after you left. Letters between Redmond and investors in New York. They're not just planning a rail line. They're planning to dam the creek. Ruth went cold. The creek that feeds every ranch in this valley? Every ranch, every farm, every well in Copper Bluff. If they dam it, they control the water. And if they control the water, they control everything. Everyone. Martha nodded. That's why he needs Caleb's land so badly. The dam site is on the North Ridge, right above the Thornton property. Without it, the whole project falls apart. Ruth's mind raced. Do you still have those letters? I burned them. What? I was scared. After you left, I panicked. Redmond has people watching me, I'm sure of it. If they'd found those letters in my house... Martha's voice cracked. I'm sorry. I'm a foolish old woman. You're not foolish. You survived. Ruth gripped her arm. Can you remember what they said? The names, the dates, any details? Some of them. The main investor was a man named Harlan Price from New York. The letters mentioned a company, Western Continental Development. And there was a figure, $2 million. $2 million. For the railroad, the dam, and all the land rights. Redmond was promised a third of the profits if he could secure the valley. Ruth closed her eyes. $600,000. That was Redmond's price for destroying every family in the valley. For running out healers and forging deeds and hiring men with guns. I need to tell Caleb, she said. Tell him, but be careful. Redmond won't stop at forged documents now. The stakes are too high. Ruth found Caleb by the barn, hammering a loose board with his right hand while his left held the wood in place. The effort was visible, his face tight with strain, his stiff fingers barely gripping. But he managed it. He always managed it. We have a bigger problem than we thought, Ruth said. She told him everything. The dam, the investors, the $2 million. He listened without interruption, his hammer going still, his face darkening with each word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. That explains it, he said finally. All of it. Why he's been so persistent. Why he won't just buy me out at a fair price and move on. It was never about my 40 acres. It's about the water. If the governor knows about the dam, it changes everything. That's not just a land dispute. That's a threat to the entire territory's water supply. But Martha burned the letters. She remembers the names. Harlan Price, Western Continental Development. That's enough for an investigation if we can get it to the right people. Agnes is already in Helena with the land records. We can't send another messenger without Redmond knowing. Ruth thought. We don't send a messenger. We send a telegram. Redmond controls the telegraph office in Copper Bluff. There's another office, in Milford, 20 miles south. Tommy Pruitt told me about it. His uncle runs the relay station there. Caleb stared at her. Tommy Pruitt is 12 years old. 12-year-old boys know everything about their territory that adults are too busy to notice. His uncle is Thomas Pruitt Sr., Agnes's brother-in-law. He's got no love for Redmond. 20 miles south. I can make it in half a day. And leave the ranch unguarded? Alderman and the others are here. Caleb, if Redmond finds out you've left, then I'd better ride fast. Ruth grabbed his arm. Let me go. No. I'm a better rider than you, and we both know it. Your hand makes it hard to control a horse at full gallop. I can make Milford by midday and be back before dark. And if Redmond's men are watching the roads? Then I won't take the roads. Tommy showed me the creek trail. It cuts through the cottonwoods and comes out south of the ridge. No one uses it except kids and coyotes. Ruth, if something happens to you out there, then you'll come find me, same as I'd come find you. She held his gaze. We're past the point of protecting each other by holding each other back. You know that. He did know it. He hated it. But he knew it. Take my rifle, he said. I'll take the shotgun. I'm a better shot with it. Take both. Now you're being ridiculous. I'm being scared. There's a difference. Ruth softened. She put her hand on his face, her palm against the rough stubble of his jaw. I'll be back before dark, she said. And when I come back, we'll have a telegram in the governor's hands, and Redmond's grand plan will be finished. Promise me. I promise. Ruth, he caught her wrist, held it. The question I said I wanted to ask you, after this was over. Yes? I don't want to wait anymore. Her breath caught. Ask me when I get back, she whispered. Give me something to ride fast for. She kissed his cheek, quick, fierce, a promise. And then she was moving, saddling the borrowed mare, checking the shotgun, filling a canteen. Caleb watched her ride south along the creek trail, her back straight, her hair coming loose from its braid, and his chest ached with something so big he couldn't name it. Bob Alderman appeared beside him. She'll make it, Alderman said. She'd better. That's one hell of a woman, Thornton. Don't I know it? You going to marry her? Caleb didn't answer, but his left hand rose to his chest and pressed flat against his heart, and that stiff, broken, impossible hand held steady for the first time in years. He stood at that fence, and he waited for her to come back, because she was coming back. She'd promised. And Ruth Calloway kept her promises. She didn't come back before dark. Caleb stood at the south fence until the last light bled out of the sky, watching the creek trail for movement. Nothing. Just wind through the cottonwoods and the distant call of an owl settling in for the night. She said before dark, he told Alderman. Could be the trail's slower than she figured. Cottonwood Path ain't exactly a main road. Something's wrong. You don't know that. I know her. She doesn't break promises. By the time full dark settled, Caleb had already saddled his gelding. Alderman blocked the gate with his body. Think about this, Thornton. You ride out at night on a trail you don't know, with that hand, and you're as likely to break your own neck as find her. Move, Bob. If Redmond's men grabbed her, riding in blind gets you both killed. If she's just delayed, you'll pass her in the dark and she'll come back to find you gone. Caleb's hands were shaking. The right one from rage, the left one because it always shook when the rest of him couldn't hold steady. Give her until first light, Alderman said quietly. If she's not back by sunrise, I'll ride with you. Caleb didn't sleep. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees and watched the southern horizon and bargained with the God he'd stopped believing in at Shiloh. Every sound, a coyote, a branch snapping, Josie shifting in the corral, sent his pulse spiking. He'd pace to the fence, stare into the blackness, pace back. At some point during the longest night of his life, he realized he was terrified. Not the cold, calculating fear of facing armed men. Not the dull, permanent fear of losing his land. This was raw, animal terror, the fear of losing someone he loved. Loved. The word landed in his chest like a bullet and stayed there. He loved her. He loved Ruth Calloway, who had walked into his life covered in dust and fury, who had healed his horse with her bare hands, who had stood beside him with a shotgun and stared down a judge and delivered a baby, and ridden south on a borrowed mare with a promise he was now destroying himself, waiting for her to keep. Please, he whispered to the dark. Please. The first gray light of dawn was creeping across the ridge when hoofbeats reached him. Caleb was off the porch before his mind caught up with his body. He vaulted the fence, stumbled, caught himself, and ran toward the creek trail with his heart hammering so hard it hurt. A horse emerged from the cottonwoods, the borrowed mare, lathered and blowing hard. Ruth was in the saddle. She was alive. She was upright. She was not alone. Behind her, on a second horse, rode a man Caleb didn't recognize. Tall, lean, wearing a federal marshal's star on his coat. And behind him, mounted on a third horse, was Agnes Pruitt. Caleb reached Ruth as she reined in. She slid from the saddle, and her legs buckled. He caught her. His arms went around her, and he held on with everything he had, his good hand gripping the back of her jacket, his bad hand pressed flat against her spine. "You're late," he said into her hair. "I know. I'm sorry." "You scared me half to death." "I know that too." "Don't ever do that again." "I can't promise that." "I don't care. Promise anyway." She pulled back enough to look at his face. She was exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, dust caked on her clothes, a scratch on her forehead that had bled and dried. But her eyes were blazing. "I made it to Milford," she said. "Sent the telegram. But when I was leaving, I ran into the stagecoach coming back from Helena. Agnes was on it." Agnes dismounted stiffly, looking as road-worn as Ruth, but wearing an expression of grim satisfaction. "I got to the governor's office," Agnes said. "Sat in his waiting room for 6 hours. His secretary tried to throw me out twice. I told him I'd sit there until Christmas if I had to." "She means it," Ruth added. "I've seen her stubborn side." "The governor read the documents," Agnes continued. "Every page. Then he called in his attorney general. Then he sent a telegram to the federal marshal's office." She gestured to the tall man with the star. "This is Marshal James Whedon. He came back with me on the return coach." Marshal Whedon dismounted and approached Caleb. He was in his 50s, with the weathered face and steady eyes of a man who'd spent decades sorting truth from lies. "Caleb Thornton," Whedon said, "I've got a lot of questions for you. But first, I need to know where Judge Silas Redmond is right now." "His ranch is 8 miles west," Caleb said. "But he was here yesterday, with 12 hired guns trying to seize my property." "He won't be seizing anything else." Whedon reached into his coat and produced a folded document. "Warrant for the arrest of Silas Redmond on charges of fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit land theft, and corruption of a public official. Signed by the territorial governor himself." Caleb took the document. His hands were shaking again, but for a different reason now. "It's over?" he asked. "Not quite. I still need to serve this warrant and arrest the man. And I could use some local support in case his hired guns have strong opinions about the matter." "You'll have it," Bob Alderman said from behind them. He'd been listening from the porch. "Every man who stood here yesterday will ride with you today." "I was hoping you'd say that." Whedon looked at Ruth. "Mrs. Calloway, the governor also asked me to give you this." He handed her a sealed envelope. Ruth opened it, read the contents, and went very still. "What is it?" Caleb asked. "It's a letter from the territorial governor's office, acknowledging my medical skills and authorizing me to practice healing arts in Montana Territory, pending formal review." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's not a medical degree, but it's recognition. Legal recognition." "That's what you deserve," Caleb said. "The governor was apparently quite impressed," Whedon added, "that a woman with no formal credentials had already treated half a town and delivered a breech baby. He said, and I'm quoting, 'Montana needs more people who can do things, and fewer people with papers saying they can.'" Ruth pressed the letter against her chest and closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were bright with tears she refused to let fall. "All right," she said. "Let's go arrest a judge." They rode to Redmond's ranch in a column that grew as they went. Word had spread through the valley overnight. The McAllisters joined at the fork. The Dunns fell in at the creek crossing. The Haywoods were waiting at the ridge with 3 hands and a wagon full of coffee and biscuits, because Mrs. Haywood believed no one should confront a tyrant on an empty stomach. By the time they reached Redmond's gate, there were 40 riders behind Marshal Whedon. Redmond's ranch was impressive, a sprawling operation that dwarfed every other spread in the valley. But its size didn't matter today. What mattered was the dozen hired guns lounging near the bunkhouse, who straightened up fast when they saw what was coming. "Federal Marshal," Whedon called out, "I have a warrant for the arrest of Judge Silas Redmond. Any man who interferes will be charged with obstruction of federal law. I strongly suggest you don't." The hired guns looked at the 40 riders. They looked at each other. One by one, they set down their weapons and stepped back. Redmond emerged from his house. He was dressed impeccably, as always, and his face showed nothing when he saw the crowd at his gate. Nothing when he saw the marshal's star. Nothing when he saw Caleb and Ruth side by side at the front of the column. He showed something when he saw Agnes Pruitt. "The shopkeeper's wife," he said softly. "I should have paid more attention to you." "Yes," Agnes said. "You should have." "Silas Redmond," Whedon announced, dismounting. "You are under arrest by order of the territorial governor." Redmond didn't resist. He stood perfectly still as Whedon secured his wrists, his back straight, his eyes moving across the faces of the people he'd terrorized for years. "You think this changes anything?" he said. "The railroad is still coming. The money is still coming. You can arrest me, but you can't stop progress." "We're not stopping progress," Caleb said. He moved his horse forward until he was face to face with the man who had tried to take everything from him. "We're stopping you. There's a difference." "And the dam?" Redmond's smile was thin, poisonous. "You know about that, I assume. Your little healer has been busy. But damming that creek would have brought irrigation to the entire valley. Jobs, commerce, growth, everything you people claim to want." "Not at the cost of our land and our water and our freedom to say no," Ruth said. "You don't get to decide what's good for people when you're stealing from them to do it." Redmond looked at her for a long time. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for, Mrs. Calloway." "Most men make that mistake with women, Judge. You'd think they'd learn." A murmur of laughter from the crowd. Real laughter, the kind that comes from watching a bully finally face someone who isn't afraid. Whedon put Redmond on a horse and secured him for the ride to Helena. Deputy Greer, who had appeared from somewhere during the proceedings, approached the marshal quietly. "I've got information," Greer said, "about Redmond's operations. Names, dates, transactions. I kept records." "Why?" Whedon asked. Greer's face was tired and old beyond his years. "Because I knew this day would come eventually. I just didn't have the guts to make it come myself." He looked at Caleb. "I'm sorry, Thornton, for all of it." Caleb studied the deputy for a long moment. "You stood down when it mattered. That counts for something." "Not enough." "Maybe not, but it's a start." Whedon departed with Redmond and Greer, heading east toward Helena. The crowd lingered, reluctant to disperse, as if breaking apart might undo the miracle of having come together. It was Mrs. Hollister who finally spoke. "Well, I suppose somebody ought to say it. Copper Bluff needs a doctor, and it seems to me we've got one, if she'll have us." Every face turned to Ruth. She stood beside her borrowed mare, dusty and exhausted, and holding a letter from the governor against her heart. And she looked at these people who had thrown her out, and then stood with her, who had feared her, and then fought for her.
"I'll have you," she said. "God help me, I'll have every stubborn, complicated one of you."
Mrs. Hollister cried. Martha Kincaid laughed. Bob Alderman blew his nose so loudly his horse startled. Caleb didn't say anything. He just looked at Ruth across the crowd with an expression that anyone with eyes could read. And Ruth looked back, and for a moment, the whole noisy, joyful, dusty mess of it fell away, and it was just the two of them. She mouthed two words across the distance. "Ask me." The ride back to the ranch was slow and sweet. People peeled off in groups as they reached their own roads, calling out goodbyes, making plans to gather at Alderman's barn on Saturday for a proper celebration. Tommy Pruitt rode alongside Caleb for a full mile, chattering about how he'd seen the whole thing from Mrs. Hollister's wagon and how he was going to be a federal marshal when he grew up. "You'd make a good one," Caleb told him, and the boy nearly fell off his horse with pride.
Agnes was the last to leave. She pulled up at the fork in the road and turned to Ruth. "Thank you," Ruth said, "for everything. For Tommy, for Helena, for being braver than anyone had a right to ask." "You were brave first," Agnes said. "I just followed." She looked at Caleb with knowing eyes. "Don't make that woman wait too long, Thornton. She's patient, but she ain't that patient."
"Yes, ma'am." Agnes smiled and rode away. They reached the ranch as the afternoon heat was settling heavy over the valley. Josie greeted them with a whinny that made Caleb's chest tight. The horse sounded stronger, more herself. Ruth went straight to the corral. She checked the mare's leg, felt her belly, and when she straightened up, her face was different.
"Caleb."
"What's wrong?"
"Nothing's wrong. The foal turned back."
He blinked. "What?"
"The foal. It was sideways. I told you it had shifted. It's turned back. Head down, proper position."
Ruth's hands were on Josie's belly, and her smile was so wide it transformed her entire face.
"She's going to be fine. The foal is going to be fine."
Caleb put his hand on Josie's neck. The mare turned her head and lipped at his sleeve, the way she'd done since she was a foal herself.
"How?" he asked. "Sometimes they just do. When the stress eases, when the body feels safe. Animals know. They know when the danger passes."
Ruth rested her forehead against Josie's side.
"She felt it, Caleb. She felt the fight end."
Caleb couldn't speak for a moment. He stood there with his hand on his horse and the woman he loved standing close enough to touch, and the weight of everything that had happened. Redmond, the standoff, the long night of waiting, the ride to Milford, the arrest, the governor's letter, settled and shifted, and finally began to lift. "Ruth." She raised her head. "Come here." She walked to him. He took her hands, both of them, right and left.
Strong and broken. All of it.
"I told you I wanted to earn it first," he said. "I told you I wanted you to see me with the fight won. Well, the fight's won. Redmond's gone. The land is safe. Josie's going to be fine." He swallowed hard. "And I'm standing here with nothing to offer you except 40 acres of dirt and a hand that barely works and a heart that's been shut so long, I'm not sure it remembers how to do this right."
"Caleb."
"Let me finish, because if I stop, I might not start again." His voice was rough, unsteady, completely honest. "When you showed up at my gate, I was surviving. That's all. I wasn't living. I was just getting through one day and then the next, telling myself that was enough because it was all I deserved. A crippled man on a broke ranch with a horse for company."
"You deserve more than that."
"I know that now, because you showed me.
Not by telling me, not by arguing with me about it, but by being the kind of person who kneels in the mud for a stranger's horse and walks back into a town that threw her out, and rides 20 miles in the dark to send a telegram for a man she barely knows.
He lifted her hands to his chest and pressed them flat against his heart. You showed me what it looks like when someone doesn't give up, on themselves or on anyone else. Ruth's tears were falling now, and she didn't try to stop them. I love you, Caleb said. I love the way you talk to horses, and the way you hold your ground, and the way you told Pastor Whitfield that God gave you hands that know what they're doing. I love that you carried your grandmother's medicine 1,000 miles because it mattered. I love that you're scared of the same things I'm scared of, and you do it anyway. Caleb. Marry me, Ruth. Not because we need each other, though God knows we do, but because I want to build something with you. A life, a real one. On this land that nearly killed me to keep, with that horse that brought you to my door. In this territory that's too wild and too hard and too beautiful to face alone. Ruth pulled one hand free from his grip. She reached up and touched his face, the stubble, the jawline, the sunburned skin. Then she took his left hand, the one he'd hidden and hated and been ashamed of for a decade, and she lifted it to her lips and kissed each stiff, scarred finger. Yes, she said. Yeah? Yes, you stubborn, impossible man. Yes. Caleb kissed her, not gentle, not tentative. He kissed her like a man who'd been drowning for 10 years and had finally broken the surface. Ruth grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him closer, and Josie whinnied behind them, and somewhere in the valley someone was whooping, probably Tommy Pruitt, who seemed to appear whenever something important happened. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I don't have a ring, he said. I don't need a ring. My mother had one, Cherokee silver. My father kept it after the soldiers took her. It's buried under the floorboard in the bedroom because I didn't trust banks. You buried your mother's ring under the floor. Safest place I knew. Ruth laughed until she cried, or maybe she'd never stopped crying. And it didn't matter, because Caleb was laughing too, and that was a sound this ranch hadn't heard in a decade. They were married 3 weeks later in Copper Bluff's tiny church, which was the same church Pastor Whitfield had used to condemn Ruth. Whitfield wasn't there. He'd left town the day after Redmond's arrest, heading east without a forwarding address, and nobody missed him. Bob Alderman gave Ruth away because he said any man whose son she delivered had earned the right. Eloise Alderman held the baby in the front pew and cried through the entire ceremony. Agnes Pruitt stood as witness and brought a cake that was lopsided but made with real sugar, which was a luxury in Copper Bluff. Tommy Pruitt served as ring bearer, carrying the Cherokee silver band on a cushion his mother had sewn for the occasion. He took the job with the gravity of a federal assignment. Martha Kincaid sat in the front row and held Mrs. Hollister's hand, and both women wept openly and without shame. Caleb wore his cleanest shirt and his only tie, and stood at the altar with his left hand visible at his side, unclenched, unhidden, for the first time in public since the war. Ruth wore a blue dress that Agnes had helped her sew from fabric donated by 6 different women in town, each contributing what she had. It wasn't white. Ruth said she'd had white the first time, and this time she wanted color. She wanted to feel alive. When the circuit preacher asked if Caleb took this woman, he said, "I do," and his voice carried to the back of the church without breaking. When the preacher asked if Ruth took this man, she said, "I already did, about 3 weeks ago. We're just making it official." The church erupted. The preacher gave up trying to maintain decorum and just pronounced them married while people were still laughing. Caleb slid the Cherokee silver ring onto Ruth's finger, and it fit perfectly, which he said was his mother's doing, from wherever she was. They walked out of that church into the summer heat, hand in hand, and the whole town of Copper Bluff was waiting. Not the town that had thrown Ruth out, the town that had stood at Caleb's fence, the town that had ridden to Redmond's ranch, the town that had chosen, finally, to be something better than fear. That night, back at the ranch, they sat on the porch. Josie dozed in the corral, her belly round, her leg healed, her foal turning and growing in the safe dark of a body that no longer carried fear. The summer air was warm and still.
I keep thinking I'm going to wake up, Caleb said.
You're awake. I checked.
How?
Pinched you during the ceremony. You flinched.
That was you? I thought it was a mosquito.
Romance isn't dead. He pulled her closer. She leaned into him, her head against his shoulder, her hand resting on his chest, where she could feel his heartbeat.
Caleb?
Yeah?
Your hand.
He looked down. His left hand was resting on her knee. The fingers, the stiff, scarred, impossible fingers, had curled around the fabric of her dress. Not much, not fully, but more than they'd moved in 10 years. The salve, he said.
It's not the salve.
Ruth laced her fingers through his, filling the gaps his couldn't close.
It's you. Bodies heal when they feel safe. I told you that about Josie, and it's true for people too.
Caleb stared at their joined hands, his broken one and her steady one, woven together, holding. Ruth Thornton, he said, testing the name.
Ruth Calloway Thornton, she corrected. I'm keeping all of it. Everything I was and everything I'm becoming.
Fair enough. They sat on that porch and watched the stars come out, one by one, over a valley that had nearly been stolen, and a ranch that had nearly been lost, and a life that had nearly been lived alone. In 2 months, Josie would deliver a healthy filly that Ruth would name Grace, because grace was what you called something precious that arrived when you'd stopped expecting it. In 6 months, Ruth's practice in Copper Bluff would be treating patients from 3 counties, and the governor himself would visit to shake her hand. In a year, Caleb would stand on his porch and watch his wife ride home from town, and his left hand would rise to wave, and the fingers would open almost all the way, and Ruth would wave back, and neither of them would mention the miracle of it. Because by then, it wasn't a miracle. It was just their life. But that was all ahead of them. That night on the porch, they had only what they had: each other, the stars, a sleeping horse, and the quiet certainty that some things, once broken, don't just heal. They grow back stronger.